Well, 10 a.m. Pacific time, when 1 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll go ahead and get started just in the interest of finishing on time, getting you guys all the information that you need. So without much further ado, my name is Claudine Lim, and I'm the Senior Associate for the Principles for Digital Development here at Dial. Thanks for joining us today. Now, today's webinar is a little bit different than our usual Pulse on the Principles session in that this is much more an informational rather than discussion-based session. So the Digital Principles, as we all know, are a community-based, community-driven initiative, meaning that the feedback and insights that we get from stakeholders, the endorser networks, essentially all of you, are really what drives our program, projects, and investments. Now, over the past few years, we've developed resources and trainings to help practitioners understand what the principles are and how to put them into practice. And in this time, the community has really grown in its understanding of the principles, and there's been sustained and growing demand for deeper dive and cross-cutting themes in the digital development trainings. Now, to that end, the team undertook a global landscape assessment last year to better understand how to continue to support digital development practitioners in the adoption and good use of the digital principles. And we are right now taking those findings to inform our current curriculum development. So today I'm really delighted to be sitting with partners who have really been instrumental in building these trainings and workshop offerings, collecting community insights, and applying these lessons and takeaways to inform our recently released RFP. Now, toward the end today, we're going to take some time to answer some of the frequently asked questions we received regarding the RFP, and then hold a live Q&A session to address the other topics that we'll cover today. So as we move into the live Q&A session, you can drop any questions that you might have in the chat, and all of the questions that have been asked and that will be asked will be published publicly on the Dial website, and this recording will be available on the Digital Principles website, so you can stay tuned for that. For any additional questions after this session, you can tag us on Twitter, or I'll also be providing my email at the end of the webinar, so you can always feel free to shoot me an email. Now, finally, we're going to turn to our fantastic panelists. And when I introduce you, just please give a little wave so the audience knows who you are. Now, to share the approach and key takeaways from our training needs and landscape assessment report, we have Barbara Willett. She is the principal with Clear Outcomes and served as the team lead for phase 1 of that training report. Now, Barbara has served as the MEL director at the MEL director level for several INGOs and has significant experience in M&E across the humanitarian and development sector. And fun fact, Barbara actually worked at Dial with me for 1.5 years before beginning a consulting career with Clear Outcomes in 2018 and taking on the research I had just mentioned. She continues to consult for Clear Outcomes and for organizations like Mercy Corps, American Red Cross, and others. So Barbara, great to have you today. I just remember you were there when I first started at Dial, so great to touch base again. Now I'm going to introduce Miss Allison Prell. She is the Director of Education and Delivery at Tech Change, where she creates boutique, blended, and e-learning experiences. A former classroom educator, Allison comes to Tech Change from George Washington University, where she earned a master's in education. She combines her passion for cultivating powerful learning experiences with her expertise in enterprise tools and systems to deliver meaningful, dynamic virtual events. And finally, so delighted to introduce my good friend, Nick Martin. He is the founder and CEO of Tech Change, where he oversees all strategy and programming. Nick is an educator, technologist, and social entrepreneur. He's a PopTech Social Innovation Fellow, an Ariane de Rothschild Fellow, and an International Youth Foundation Global Fellow. He's an adjunct faculty member at George Washington University and Georgetown University. So thank you all for joining me today. So just a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. We're going to start off with Tech Change, talking about all the trainings that we have to offer. We know there's so much that we've been releasing over the past year and summer. So just to give you guys a sense of what's out there and what might be the best fit for your team or organization. Then we'll take a deep dive into the training landscape and needs assessment, some of the research and workshops that took place and the key takeaways. And from there, we're going to say how those key takeaways really informed our recently released RFP for an instructional design vendor, and then we'll move into Q&A. So with that all being said, I'm going to go ahead, kick it over to the Tech Change team to let us know all about the digital principles trainings.
Thanks so much, Claude, and just really excited to be here and be able to connect with the digital principles community and with Barbara from Clear Outcomes and my colleague Allison. Thrilled to be here today with you all. So it's been a really remarkable 3-year journey that we've been on here with Dial, being able to build and author a number of different learning and training materials. What started out as a kind of set of materials that we designed at Digital Principles 101 in person, largely for donor audiences, has grown to a much more expansive catalog, which Allison will share with you in a minute. But we will actually go deeper as well into our ideation process, which many of you who may be watching this had the chance to participate in one of our international in-person ideation workshops in Nairobi, in Seattle, in DC. Barbara and I were down in Medellin, Colombia, trying to kind of figure out who are we trying to reach with this training material. What are the audiences? What do people need? What is that ideal training that folks are looking for? How do we connect dots between this incredible framework that we have in the digital principles and the digital transformation journeys that so many of you are on? And so from there, we did come up with a range of online courses, train the trainer models. Allison will go deeper into all of those. And of course, had to account for COVID and all the crazy realities that have happened this year in adapting some of our plans to really accommodate the virtual aspect of these trainings. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison to share sort of a list and range of the different courses that we've built. And then I'll come in at the end to share any additional details that we might need to. So Allison, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick. Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Prell. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just to present some visuals to accompany my presentation today. So hello, everyone. I'd like to kick off webinars oftentimes by just kind of posing a question to you all and asking you to think about what is your biggest challenge that you face in online learning? Is it limited bandwidth or internet access? Is the content not in an engaging format? Or do you feel isolated from a particular community that's also engaging in the online learning with you? And potentially what else might there be that's not captured on this list? Go ahead and respond in the chat for this webinar and just kind of have that in the back of your mind as we're talking about the different offerings today. I ask this because at Tech Change, this is the forefront of our minds when we're designing content. We build beautiful and engaging courses on topics that matter. And we do this by using a data-driven approach, capitalizing on soft skills development and emphasizing community building to deepen learner engagement. So at Tech Change, we support Dial in the advancement of the digital principles by creating an intentional learning and training space that empowers diverse practitioners. So I'll share briefly just like our approach to online learning as context for how we built the courses and trainings with Dial. So these are our 10 principles that we designed by, but shown another way, they can be distilled into 3 pillars: an emphasis on human-centered design, a commitment to educational pedagogy shaping the technology used in online learning environments, and a promotion of various tiers of engagement, whether it be respective to the learner through a balance of dynamic activities and assessments, or interpersonal engagements for a virtual community of learners. So that's just a bit of a background on us, Tech Change, but why are we here today? So I'm gonna walk you all through a catalog of the Dial online course offerings, the newest course that launched recently, introducing the digital principles, as well as the world of online virtual trainings as it pertains to Digital Principles 101. So in terms of the catalog of Dial courses, at digitalprinciples.course.tc, you can sign up on the learning platform to access all of the resources that I'll be talking through today. Some of you may be familiar with the courses and trainings offerings that are already on the platform. For example, there's a series connecting the digital principles framework to relevant topics. The 4 topics covered are, the emerging tech, ethics, privacy and security, and gender. Each course includes general definitions and stats, case studies, self-assessments, and additional resources for further exploration. Additionally, there's a training of trainers to build your skills in facilitating the Digital Principles 101 in-person training. But what you might not be aware of is the most recent course that launched, which is Introducing the Digital Principles, a self-paced course. So this course introduces each of the 9 digital principles, contextualizes them in a digital health program case study, and showcases tools and resources that can be applied to all stages of the project lifecycle. The course's case study, though fictitious, was modeled after a successful mHealth phone survey. Phone Joan is a service offering advice and support by mobile phone to new and expected mothers in Bangladesh. So inspired by this program, we designed Mama Jun for the course, the digital health program case study that's featured throughout, which is a mobile alliance for maternal action program implemented in the great country of Monessa. Though you won't be able to find Monessa on any map, it is generally located in South Asia and has many of the same characteristics of many lower and middle income countries. So this was the context through which we presented each of the digital principles. We follow an avatar, Magda, which you can see on the right, who has extensive experience in maternal and child health and often serves as a subject matter expert for NGOs and government organizations across the region. So it's her and her team that navigate the necessary considerations for this digital health project implementation, Mama Jun, in the context of Monessa. So each module of the course introduces a new digital principle, the core tenets of said principle, and showcases some of the ways in which Magda and the rest of the Mama Jun project implementers take the principle into consideration while executing the project. Additionally, identified resources from the digital principles community are shared, mapping resources to project lifecycle phases and highlighting those resources which contribute to more than one principle, allowing for maximum impact. So learners navigate the course seeing the program from the point of view of the project implementation team, participating in dynamic and engaging activities that challenge them to extend their knowledge and skills pertaining to each digital principle. I know that's some pretty exciting stuff, but wait, there's more, as you hear in your favorite infomercials. In the world of virtual and online trainings, we have quite a few to showcase for you all today. We worked closely with Dial to adapt the Digital Principles 101 training for virtual delivery, still keeping with a collaborative modular approach. So now you and your 30 closest friends and colleagues can participate in this highly engaging training to build your foundational understanding of the digital principles, but in a virtual environment. If you're someone who has taken the Digital Principles 101 training and are hoping to facilitate the training virtually, the Training of Trainers workshop has also been adapted for virtual delivery. Not only does it touch on how to facilitate the 101 online, but it also includes discussions and considerations for virtual facilitation best practices. Should you take the TOT workshop, you will gain access to the Digital Principles 101 virtual training materials module, which is an asynchronous course which, similar to its in-person counterpart, has videos documenting how to facilitate each activity online and additional resources for facilitators. Lastly, not only would you receive a Digital Principles 101 virtual training how-to guide, but also the Tech Change virtual facilitation playbook, which presents best practices for facilitating in online environments, as well as general technology considerations. So this is quite an extensive list. Not only do we have all of these online training offerings, but the course that I mentioned earlier as well. So I'll turn things over to you, Nick, to fill in any gaps that I might have missed.
That's great. Thanks, Allison. And just to say, we're all having to flex our virtual training and facilitation muscles, whether as facilitators or within our own organizations these days. And so these resources are fantastic, even if the digital principles are not necessarily front and center in your content journey with your organization. There's just been a number of really useful tips and tricks for how to stage these types of sessions really well. So thank you so much for that, Allison. And I guess back to you, Claude or Barbara, to kind of walk us through the ideation workshop process, and then I'll come back in to share a bit about the workshops after we hear from Barbara.
Perfect. So thank you, Allison, for giving us a very comprehensive and breakdown of all the trainings that we have. So I hope that this has been helpful for the audience to understand what is out there. So now we're going to actually then turn to the 2019 Training Needs and Landscape Assessment Report. And I'm going to then pass it over to Barbara to talk about the research phase. So this undertaking was really put into two phases: first research, and then workshops, really to understand what trainings exist around the digital principles and what is the appetite for more. So I'm going to go ahead, share my screen, and then Barbara, if you want to go ahead and kick us off.
Great, thank you. Excuse me, can you hear me okay? For the problem, great. So, as Claude said, we split this project into two phases. But I think Clear Outcomes and Tech Change partnered on the whole of it, but we really took the lead in the first research phase, and then Tech Change came in for the second part that Nick will talk about, doing some really in-depth ideation workshops and learning firsthand what people are looking for. So what we did was start with trying to understand what was out there. And the method that we took, first we had 3 primary research questions. These kind of evolved out of the scope of work that Dial initially published last year. So the first research question was understanding what materials or training resources are already available out there in the stratosphere anywhere. Who has developed them? Who's using what? Are they things that could be repurposed or that could be used or improved on by Dial and by the digital community? So first understanding what's out there. The second research question really was if there's then to be a greater investment in training around the digital principles by Dial, then what should that look like? What should the content be? What should the delivery models be? How should it be delivered? Will people pay for it? What are people really looking for in that? This is where I think the most information, the richest information that we found comes out in this section. The third question was about how training then could be used to increase adoption and use of the principles. So what's out there? How can that be improved? What else should be available? And how can any of that be used by the sector, by individuals, by organizations to really improve how they're using and adopting the principles and doing digital development? We did, of course, a desk review looking across the landscape of the literature and what was publicly available, looking across kind of the digital development history and some of Dial's publications and what Tech Change and others are doing, and kind of the training landscape, what has evolved, particularly as it relates to the digital development. So, what are people using in terms of online trainings and MOOCs and internal organizational LMSs and things like that. So trying to get a sense for the whole sector approach to training. Then in addition to the desk review, we did some primary research. We did a set of key informant interviews and hosted an online survey. The key informant interviews, we targeted, this was after a lot of consultation with DIAL, with Tech Change. We focused on 5 particular kind of stakeholder groups, not necessarily organizations, but who are the individuals involved in digital development and decision-making around training and use of technology and development. So we targeted really who are the big thought leaders that have already been working in this area and already have done a lot, tried a lot, have a lot of thoughts about it. Who are the training specialists, whether they're within organizations or kind of third-party providers like a Tech Change. Donor program officers, so from donor organizations, the ones that are closest to field implementation and understanding what the challenges are with using technology in the work. Implementing program managers, again, looking a lot at INGOs and for-profits, but those closest to the ground to actually implementing programs and understanding the challenges, and to the extent that we could, local government officials. So these are all the people that we tried to target. We ended up doing like 57 key informant interviews with people across global North and South. One of our researchers was based in Africa. She's a startup entrepreneur, tech entrepreneur in Kenya. And then a couple of our researchers, including myself here in the US, talked to people from Africa, Asia, Middle East, Americas, kind of everywhere we could find them. We did this online survey, had about 200, almost 200 responses, sent it out to kind of whatever relevant listservs we could find through the Digital Principles Community Practice. Those organizations have already endorsed the principles, ICT Works, Merle-Tech, et cetera, LinkedIn groups. Worked a lot, again, with DIAL and Tech Change to identify the right people to talk to and reach out to. And I will go quickly through the findings. I'm not going to dwell on them too much. I've got some findings for each of the key questions and then some general recommendations that we made. I will breeze through the recommendations because DIAL and Tech Change have already breezed through those recommendations and have already made tremendous progress on sort of the results of this whole process. So I won't spend a whole lot of time. But just to give you a sense of what we did find, first of all, that first question about what's out there, who's already doing training. Yeah, nobody really was. That was kind of the short answer. The longer answer is a lot of people are doing, this would be mostly within large INGOs, for-profit, not-for-profit, and some donor organizations, the USAIDs and the GTZs and things like that. We're doing some training around digital development and sometimes included digital principles in it, but not really anything dedicated to training around the digital principles. So, so that short answer was there wasn't really a lot available. People that have done some of that were willing to contribute and participate, thought it was a noble venture, but not a lot to build on. We asked just a couple of data points from the survey. Has your organization done internal training on the digital principles? So, you know, the majority said no, a few said yes. Were the materials developed internally or externally, kind of a hybrid? So nothing really conclusive, again, not a lot. Some of it was proprietary. People really weren't willing to share what they developed. The second question, as I said, there's a lot in here that I hope was able to contribute to some of the choices that DIAL and Tech Change made moving forward on that really impressive set of offerings and workshops. There wasn't a lot that was truly conclusive or consensus because there were so many different people from so many different perspectives with a lot of different ideas. But I think in general, what we heard was a need for a blended approach. Everybody recognizes that online is scalable, it's accessible, makes it something that everybody can get to, but everybody still loves the personal touch. So having some opportunity for communities, cohorts, in-person engagement would seem to be really important to people. Likewise, we kind of talked about whether it should be one universal training or tailored to different audiences. We heard people wanted a little bit of, the biggest calls we heard were for a difference between donors, of what training donors should get and what training implementing organizations should get, because they have some sort of different priorities and different things that came out of the research that seem to be important. People talked about third-party approaches and whether they'd be willing to pay for things. Again, things were kind of all over the landscape. A few quotes we pulled out here, and you can read the report in depth to get more of the detail. But one of the things that people were really concerned about was the diversity of trainers and any kind of training that's available, knowing that something speaks to them and their context, in their languages, and in voices that they can recognize, in contexts and scenarios that they can relate to, was really important to people. Go to the next slide. Then the third question was, how can training sort of leverage adoption and improve adoption and use of the principles? Because we didn't really find a lot of examples of training happening related specifically to the principles. This became a little bit broader question, but a couple of things that I thought were interesting were related to organizations that were involved in sort of sponsoring training or sponsoring people to participate in training around the principles. Establishing a community within that would exist beyond the training itself. So again, that the importance of that connection and the peer mentoring or peer cohorts. So being able to have people share ideas. And also it was noted that this would be a whole lot more useful if it was part of an organizational strategy. So it's one thing to just send somebody off to a training, they come back and say, that was great. But if it's not an organizational commitment to say, we endorse the principles, we're getting our people trained on it, we're committed to making decisions based on what's important and what people learn from these trainings and what the principles tell us, then it can be sort of a scattershot sort of impact. And also the idea of that donors don't mandate the use of principles in a lot of the funding. So there's sort of organizational mandates and strategies from within implementing organizations, but also a role that donor organizations can play in supporting, mandating, and recognizing what it actually costs and what it takes to be able to implement the digital principles. A couple of quotes, anything interesting here? One point here is that a comment that the donor environment is sometimes at odds with good tech innovation and digital development and some of the principles, in that there's a lot of sort of predestination involved in determining what you're going to achieve, what your targets are, your commitment to that, and you've failed if you don't reach your targets. So if you overcommit in the beginning and don't allow yourself space to iterate and change and adjust, sometimes you kind of got some conflicting goals. So that was just something that came out quite a bit in people talking about the challenges. So this and the next slide are 6 sort of conclusions and recommendations that we came away with. I don't know that I need to go through them all in detail. I think in general, what I heard from Allison in describing the course content echoes a lot of what we heard there. That people wanted blended. People want contextual. They want the opportunity to have both a general approach to all the principles, kind of a basics 101 for all of the principles, but also the ability to drill down deeply into really specific understanding of the principles and case studies and contextual relativity. So it looks like a lot of that has already been taken into consideration and adopted. So, so again, you can look at the report if you want to see specifically what those were. A couple of graphs that I threw up. This was just something I thought might be interesting in this context and in this conversation was about certification. That was one of the questions, kind of a secondary question. Would it be important to people to have certification available? I'm certified in the digital principles. Kind of all over the landscape here in terms of who thought it was important. Actually, interestingly, government seem to rank it highest as being really critically important. So that's not really surprising from the government mindset, but you can see that there is some support for the idea that this could be a professional path and something that can lend itself both to sort of professional development, individual professional development, but also industry standards and progression. And I think that was the last slide. So happy to answer any questions about any of the research or findings.
Thank you, Barbara. So that was summary of the research phase. So back over to you, Nick. So tell us a little bit about how you took this information and let it guide the workshop phase 2 of this.
And thanks to Barbara and thanks to Claude for that segue. So yeah, it was actually wonderful to have the clear outcomes research be so thorough and so on point. We were able to kind of build directly off of their fantastic findings and also stress tests and go deeper into some of the buckets that Barbara raised. And so we convened a series of 4 workshops in different parts of the world: Nairobi, Seattle, Washington, D.C., and Medellin. And we had one-day workshops where we essentially designed a series of activities to capture as much insight and experience from our groups as possible in these different regions. We did activities like paired interviews. We had people from different organizations interviewing each other about how they are thinking about training in their organizations, where they want to be as far as training, and what types of incentives drive people to take advantage of training. We did a ton of personas, mapping out different people in different markets and tried to sort of understand what their needs were from a training perspective. We wanted to think intentionally about the different types of personas: donors, NGOs, technologists, social entrepreneurs, government officials, which derive directly from the clear outcomes research, to be able to go a bit deeper and really understand who are these people, what do they want, what do their professional journeys look like, and where might a digital principles training factor in to those journeys. We did a creative matrix exercise in each of these markets where we mapped out all the possible training, conference, any type of report or toolkit that might somehow relate to digital transformation or one of the topics related to the digital principles, to get a better understanding of where there were gaps and where there were already a lot of things happening that we could build off of in the spirit of the principle reuse and improve. And then we even asked people, hey, if you had a chance to design your ideal training, what would that look like? And got some really fascinating ideas and insights, which we then used to inform a number of the materials that Allison shared earlier. The last thing I'll share, there were some kind of interesting high-level findings, sort of building directly off of what Barbara shared, and we did find that there were kind of varying levels of interest in certification, but that some audiences definitely gravitated towards them, especially in Medellin and Nairobi. That idea of having a certificate really was tied with upward mobility. Time and attention spans being the greatest constraints to a lot of folks in their learning journeys and their digital transformation journeys. And so kind of building off what Barbara said, we're really trying to think about how we tie the training content and the materials directly to somebody's use case and work life. And we've really attempted to do that with our synchronous, both live and in-person and virtual trainings as well. Lots of talk about blended training, and blended in our world can mean so many different things. Blended in person and online, but even blending different formats of online. And I think we're already feeling that, and many of you are experiencing that in COVID times. We can take self-paced courses, but we also have the ability to show up for synchronous virtual workshops on platforms like Zoom and elsewhere, and really trying to design for that spectrum. And then the last thing we are sharing here, which I think is still a need, even a year later, we're still at a point where we welcome more case studies from organizations who are grappling with digital transformation and feel confident, comfortable sharing some of those learnings back with the larger community. This over and over again in our trainings comes up. People want to know how others suffered through some digital transformation piece and came out of the other side successful and learned from it. And so, I think there's definitely still more that we can be doing to build this case study knowledge repository, and then to sort of build activities and training materials directly around real life examples. So Claude, hopefully that helps to give you and the folks listening a bit of an overview of where we ended up in this process. And just to say, it was really a pleasure to work with Barbara and the team at Clear Outcomes to be able to balance and go deep, deeper with these workshops to complement the fantastic research and report that they produced in the process. So back to you, Claude.
All right, thank you very much to both the Clear Outcomes team as well as Tech Change for that presentation. So if you want any more information, if you really feel compelled to get into the deep dive, we do have both the phase 1 and phase 2 reports available on our website. Now we'll be moving on to, like I mentioned, the recently released RFP. So at the conclusion of this global landscape report, it was essentially determined that demand does exist among digital practitioners, that trainings will help them better understand and use the digital principles, and that DIAL should continue to produce this program. So learning from and building on the findings of the report, we released the RFP in search of an instructional design firm to produce new series of trainings to fill the gaps that have been identified by stakeholders. We'll be testing various models for delivering the courses and trying to reach the global stakeholders to ensure that we successfully scale and ensure sustainability for these resources. So for the RFP, the objective of this work is to design, develop, and produce 2 multi-module and multimedia online training courses. So Digital Principles 201 and 301, with a companion training of trainers courses, which will be focused on new topics in digital development and the principles themselves. And the selected instructional design firm will be responsible for taking the existing courses and the new content and transforming it into instructional material suitable for both in-person as well as virtual delivery. So I'm going to take some time to address some of the most frequently asked questions that we've received so far on their RFP. We have more, but as I mentioned, they're all available on the website. So first question that was pretty recurring was, is there a target audience for the anticipated courses? So this one's always a fun question because people ask, who's the audience for the digital principles? And so my answer is that the content should really be tailored broadly for anyone who works in digital development or tech. This includes organizations that utilize or build technology, digital tools to enable international development programs or projects. Our 101 training has been delivered to project implementers, donors, tech hubs, lots of different groups based in nearly every continent. But all those activities and that trainings and discussions have been able to be tailored to fit different groups' needs, interests, and contexts while focusing on the principles. Another question that we got a lot was, what is your vision about the learning material of the course, and what would you define as success? So success for this project will be measured through attendees' ability to apply a digital principles lens to other topics. So for example, attendees will understand how the principles can inform decisions or processes in digital supply chains, environment, land tenure projects, etc. Attendees will also know how to report and measure the use and impact of the principles in their work, how to design the programs and tools with the principles in mind at the onset rather than retrospectively. And then going forward, attendees will not only be able to explain the principles, but know how to actively and intentionally incorporate and measure good use of them by using the existing tools and resources or whatever they might have learned from the course. And then the last question that I will address today is, due to COVID-19, would you consider doing this digitally with a team well-versed in this type of delivery? And I think the answer is a resounding yes. DIAL is a digitally focused team, and this has been really pronounced, especially due to COVID-19. We anticipate this work to be conducted virtually, including but not limited to meetings, workshops, stakeholder testing, And the final product, we intend for it to be virtual, but also adapted for in-person delivery. So just trying to fit different needs and contexts and reach as many stakeholder groups as possible, and while staying as engaging as possible. So like I said, this is not the comprehensive list of questions we've received so far. These are all answered publicly on the DIAL website. So I will take some time now to see if there are any questions from the audience, whether it's for myself or for TechChange. So let me just give it a few moments. All right, so I do have one question for, I believe it's Barbara. So question for Clear Outcomes. What were some key differences and commonalities in the needs across key informant groups during the research phase?
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah. What were some key differences and commonalities in the needs across key informant groups during the research phase? So maybe, yeah.
Yeah, some differences were, some of the differences were, there were people who felt that trainings should be universal and it should be up to the learner to apply the principles to whatever their context was, and others who felt that the trainings should be tailored to sector. So you have a health related application of the principles, or agriculture, or education, or what have you. So there were some differences there. There were differences, as I noted, there was some sense that what program implementers were looking for might be different from what what donors might be looking for. And I think part of that was the content may not be that different, but there were things that felt like the implementers wanted donors to know and understand about what the implications of using these principles are for implementing programs and staff people, just the challenges, the added time when there's always there's pressure to produce results quickly with the least amount of money possible, and be upfront about what the targets are, and as I mentioned before. So there's some of those donor-based expectations that I think implementers seem to strongly suggest they need donors to understand what those trade-offs are, and kind of what difference it makes in terms of development work when we're trying to apply the principles. There were some differences. I can't really speak, we didn't have enough representation, I think, from different geographies to speak to any specific differences based on that. But I think the closer we got to the field, to the grassroots and actual implementers, the more demand there was for people who really understand what I'm experiencing here in this place, in my context. Whereas kind of the more you go up the chain within an organization, the more you kind of want to see broad solutions and approaches that can answer big questions and address institutional needs. So there was that sort of dichotomy of challenge and of interest, I think, there. Commonalities, though, I think were, everybody wants detail. They want context. They want they want somebody to kind of go through the journey, the learning and training journey with them. But they want a little bit of control over it too. So this sort of blended approach to it, maybe a choose your own adventure, or I need what I need when I need it. So having some of that flexibility, but having a coach to help you with it, those kinds of things, even though they're sometimes in conflict, those were very commonly expressed, regardless of the participant. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think that does.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Barbara. And next question, it's actually in the same theme of that, I think this is posted for Tech Change. So when hosting or facilitating 101 workshops, how do you find the conversations differ between donor and implementer groups? How do you design trainings to keep the principles relevant across diverse geographies and sectors?
A great question. Well, and as I mentioned at the very beginning, we actually started on this path with Dial and with Digital Principles, building materials for donors that had come out of a fairly exhaustive donor canvas and similar kind of landscape analysis. And we found that donors are really taking their responsibility seriously about how do we at the top of the kind of funding food chain promote best practices and rally around a framework like the Digital Principles. Donors love the Digital Principles because it means they can all share a common language, they share a common framework. And so we're seeing, there's a lot of excitement that this exists among donors. How to do better procurement is certainly kind of a big thing that donors are thinking about, how to evaluate RFPs according to digital principles is something we've spent a lot of time thinking about and training on. We have an activity in this training called the Digital Principles card game, which essentially has kind of scenarios that link the digital principles to the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's a really fantastic activity that helps us think about both program design from an implementer standpoint and donors, how they would evaluate programs based on using the principles as their guide. I think what we're seeing also is that we were in Sweden with CETA and we had the CETA, the sort of International Development Donor Agency, brought all of their implementing organizations or a selection of them to the Digital Principles 101 training and took it alongside the staff from CETA. So some really exciting models where these donors are trying to set the stage and the tone for really taking this training and this framework seriously. And that does matter, right? I think the endorsement of having these larger donors endorse the principles does trickle down to having implementers take it more seriously from an implementation standpoint. So great question.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. So I think this next one is actually posed to kind of both clear outcomes and tech change, maybe. I'll let you guys see how you want to suss this out. But can you talk a little more about how findings from the research phase influence the activities or discussions in the workshop phase? So I suppose, how did you take those key takeaways and did it influence the workshop or persona activities at all?
It did. I mean, so basically we worked with Barbara and Clear Outcomes directly to kind of identify 5 or 6 kind of major themes that emerged from the report related to things like certification, balance of what does blended mean, how long training should be, how much training. And we had an activity in the workshop that essentially had our participants lining up along a wall or to kind of agree or disagree, or a 4 corners activity if there were 4 different variables. So we used the kind of provocative research data and questions that Barbara and team had generated, and then used it to kind of stage this exact activity. And then we could go deeper. We could actually ask people in the room, all right, well, you thought that certificates were more important. Why did you think that? And then we captured a lot of really fantastic qualitative data. And we're able to stage a bit of a kind of back and forth, right? Part of the beauty of having everybody in person is that we can actually have a bit of a dialogue around whether or not these things matter and how much they matter and why. And so, I think there was some really nice complementarity there. But I don't know, Barbara, if other elements stuck out to you in that kind of that tandem approach between the report and the workshops.
No, I think what you explained was spot on. There was also just kind of the user personas that I think we developed maybe a little bit in tandem, based partly on who the stakeholder groups were that we identified for the research itself, and then kind of carried that over into like who would we really be targeting. Coming back to that, who's the target audience for this, and it's a number of different people in a number of different types of organizations and scenarios. So I think that was part of it as well. But
Awesome. Thank you both. Yeah, and I'll say like the workshops that I've been to with Tech Change, they're always like really fun, interactive. You get to move around out of your seat. So if you ever get the chance or get invited, highly recommend. So next question for Barbara, I believe. So how did you identify specific stakeholders to interview in the research phase? Were they all already familiar with or measuring use of the principles?
Great question. It's a little bit of both. We had to start somewhere. Kind of started with the known universe, both from dial contacts and from ours. And you do need some of the participants that have been part of this conversation for a long time to help ground some of it and guide some of it. But we also wanted to reach out as much as possible to others that maybe haven't had a voice so far in the conversation. And we did talk to a number of people who were not familiar with the principles, who hadn't used it. We did a little bit of snowballing, so trying to get somebody from one organization to refer us to others that may be out in the field working on a technology program, but maybe not familiar with the digital principles. And so trying to reach as many people in that way as possible, and hear a lot of different perspectives. So it was a mix. But there are not, I would say there were more people that were not deeply involved with and embedded with the principles than that were, I think, in the overall audience. So, for some people it was a learning opportunity for them, and an opportunity to really think, oh, it would have been nice to have known more before I started the journey that I'm on right now. So those perspectives were really valuable too.
Awesome, thank you, Barbara. And I think I'm going to take one last question. This seems like it's targeted for the Tech Change team. So what were some of the big challenges you had adapting the pre-existing 101 training to virtual? What are the perks and setbacks of each, assuming that means virtual and in-person training?
Allison, do you want to take this?
Sure, I'm happy to. Great question. So I'd say I'll start with the perks. As I think a lot of us are finding is being able to engage online is removing a lot of barriers that occur when in person, right? So paying for conference fees, the challenges of extended travel and the like. And so what we're finding is being able to host and facilitate these workshops online as we're having more and more people be able to attend that may not be able to come to some of these events in person. Of course, with that comes its challenges of, not only are there bandwidth considerations, but just the differences in ability and background of various folks as they come to workshops with technical abilities, right? And so in any one group, you'll have a whole spread of participants who might be new to Zoom or new to WebEx or whatever features that are hosting the training, as well as some of, I mentioned briefly, or maybe I didn't, some of the third-party enterprise collaborative tools that we've utilized a lot in our work that parallels our platform very nicely in their collaborative approach, such as Mural or Miro, for those of you who might have heard or used them before. But with any new technology, right, there's a learning curve. And so being able to factor in not only, the time for having a virtual environment in learning about the digital principles, but also learning about and how to use the tools to then learn the digital principles, right? All of that takes time and consideration, balanced against any sort of Zoom or digital fatigue from, being online almost at all hours, right? And so those are definitely some of the challenges that we've encountered, but have various working models for our workshop offerings, whether, 3 by 3 by 3, 3 hours, 3 days a week for 3 weeks, which is one model that we're using for a different training that we're offering for a digital health training. But it's been a very interesting experience and a very valuable one. And I'd like to think that If you are someone who is able to attend both the virtual and the in-person training, is that you would find that the collaborative experience that you enjoyed from that in-person is still preserved in the virtual delivery as well, just with some more digital tools to help provide that experience.
Beautiful. Thanks, Allison. So I think we're just anything else from the speakers that you wanted to add to that? Just thoughts, opinions? No? Okay. Well, I think that means we're just about wrapping up the agenda here. So thank you everyone to join. Thank you to all our delightful panelists. Again, if you have any questions about the RFP that we released, please email me. Check out the website for ones that have already been answered. And I hope that this session has given you a little better idea of what we have to offer and how that report has really guided this RFP moving forward. So thank you everyone and have a great rest of your Thursday.